Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation to our public discussion, Overcoming Historical Divisions, the case study of Bulgaria, North Macedonia. My name is Walter Kaufmann. I am the head of the Department for Eastern and Southeastern Europe at the Heinrich Böll Foundation's headquarters in Berlin. You may know that the Heinrich Böll Foundation is the green affiliated foundation of the political foundations in Germany. This public event was initiated by the Western Balkan Strategy Group. This group, the Strategy Group, is a group of legal, historical, and political researchers and experts from all West Balkan 6 countries that has been organized by the Heinrich Böll Stiftung offices in Belgrade, Sarajevo, and Berlin. The group stands for a proactive and pro-democratic political, societal, and economic European integration of the West Balkan 6. Ladies and gentlemen, the current dispute between Bulgaria and Northern Macedonia is not the first and unfortunately probably not the last bilateral dispute between an EU member state and a West Balkan candidate state that hampers the EU integration process. Just remember the name dispute between Greece and Northern Macedonia, or the current interventions of Croatia into discussions about the political representation of ethnic Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In all of these cases, we see issues tied to language, to history, to ethnic and national identity being taken up and instrumentalized against democratic reforms by nationalist forces. We are witnessing political efforts that use history as a tool for denial of human rights and dignity. The manipulation of history and imposing historical truths by political forces are becoming a trend in Europe again, thus endangering the basic principles and values of the European Union. At the moment, relations between Northern Macedonia and Bulgaria are at their lowest in decades. The enthusiasm after signing a friendship treaty in 2017 has turned to an open dispute between the two governments over historical heritage and questions of identity of ethnic Macedonians. The Bulgarian blockade of Northern Macedonia's opening talks for accession to the EU has deteriorated this fragile relationship. Bulgaria's veto reflects an asymmetry of power between EU member states and candidate countries and puts the EU integration process in danger. Now, Skopje and Sofia are trying to come out of the current limbo. Bulgaria has just had elections, but could not form a new government yet, and it remains to be seen if an interim government can do any steps in regard to the dispute before new snap elections will take place in July. Northern Macedonia has prepared an action plan proposal for the bilateral relations. We hope that today's event can help to bring a fruitful and productive discussion forward on the dispute and on steps to be taken by Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and the European Union. With this, I would like to give the floor to Tobias Flessenkemper. He is the head of the Office of the Council of Europe in Belgrade, a longtime specialist on the Western Balkans and a good friend of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, who accepted our invitation to moderate the discussion today. Tobias, thank you for that. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Walter, and welcome everyone. Good morning to everyone online. As Walter just introduced myself, I'm heading the office of the Council of Europe in Belgrade, but today I'm actually here in a personal capacity, although I will of course draw on the various experiences that the Council of Europe has made in multilateral cooperation and of course also in the issue of history. We will come to this later in the discussion. It's now my great pleasure to introduce a very distinguished panel. We have Tineke Strik, a member of the European Parliament, representing the Greens, in the European Parliament in Brussels from the Netherlands as our panelist, and she will speak about the role of the EU in political disputes. But we'll start with two experts from the countries concerned. First will be Darko Leitner-Stoyanov. He is a historian from Skopje and based in Vienna as well. And the second speaker will be Chavdar Marinov. He's an historian from Sofia, and he will speak about the problematics behind the historical disputes and the potential impact on the Western Balkans 6, meaning those 6 countries not yet members of the European Union. What we have planned today is that we have the inputs first in the order of Mr. Darko Leitner-Stoyanov, a perspective from Skopje, then a perspective from Sofia by Chavdar Marinov, and the perspective by Tineke Strik from Brussels. We will then discuss a little bit on the panel, if you wish, and clarify some questions. Here, the statement as well by Daliborka Uljarevic, who will present a paper, When Conditionality Becomes Blackmail, EU member states should not write the history of candidate countries. All of this will give us a lot of material for discussion. I am inviting you to take actively part in the discussions, and you have all channels at your disposal. You can leave a comment or a question on the Zoom chat, but also on the live streams on Facebook and YouTube. And you can also request to take the floor if you so wish. But we will, of course, reserve the right to see if it works, that we can invite people to take the floor actively. With this, I would like to invite the first speaker, Darko Leitner-Stoyanov, who, as I said, is in Skopje and Vienna, and he will try to demystify, as he has entitled his introduction, the dispute. So, Darko, we are very much looking forward to your demystification of the dispute.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the nice introduction. I will speak about elements of the works of this Joint Historical Commission, in which I was a member for 2 years, from the summer of 2018 until the summer of 2020. So the Joint Bulgarian-Macedonian Historical Commission was formed in the late June 2018. So it's been working now for almost 3 years. It's consisted of although the commission is one body, it's consisted basically of 2 working teams, one from the Macedonian side and another from the Bulgarian side. And they both have 7 historians or other researchers from different disciplines. That means mostly historians, but we also had an anthropologist, ethnographer, a person from the cultural studies, an archaeologist as well. So there was some effort at multidisciplinarity here. So the members of the commission usually meet, depending on the year, but 4, 6, up to 8 times per year, maybe more. And the meetings before the pandemics were usually in the capital cities of both countries. So the commission would meet once in Skopje, the next time in Sofia, then back in Skopje, etc., etc. And now the meetings, as much as I know, are mostly online, of course. Both teams or the commission is working in the under the umbrellas of the ministries of foreign affairs in both countries. Yeah, but they do. The members of the commission determine on themselves the work plan, the topics discussed, the results, etc. The commission basically works in 2 areas. The first one is the politics of memory or politics of remembrance. It tries to locate interesting historical figures and events that could be seen as shared in a historical and cultural perspective, whether shared as in what is considered to be Macedonian national history or Bulgarian national history, but also shared sometimes, in some instances, in the wider region. Then, on the other hand, the Commission also works in the field of politics of education. That is to say that it tries to prepare recommendations that will go to the governments of both countries on how certain changes can be made in the process of history education, especially in relations to narratives and textbooks, history textbooks. And in this sense, in this aspect of the work, both teams of the Commission prepare an analysis or remarks of the textbooks, and then they exchange this information on what one team sees as that can be done better in the textbooks of the other country, and vice versa. So this information is exchanged in order to try to provide narratives that are not in do not contain nationalism or not perceived as insulting by the other side, and so on. Yeah. So that being said, the work of the Commission has been quite difficult, both in terms of the responsibility and the workload that it has in these almost 3 years, and also very complex in relation to the general public, especially in both countries. So I would say that to a certain level, the word mystification or demystification is maybe right here. And that is because the Commission, the work of the Commission is usually, that is to say, not open for the public, behind closed doors. And the recommendations that have been reached so far, or the joint conclusions, are not yet released for the public. And then there is the question of journalism, of course. There is a variety of ways how different medias report on the issue. But I believe that soon enough, that these joint conclusions and recommendations that have been reached so far, it's an ongoing process, can be released, and this can open a much wider debate and can sort of demystify even more the work of the Commission. Yeah, and yeah. That being said, as I mentioned, the Commission works in 2 areas, and it has in the field of history as such. So there are plenty of historians in the Commission, but the field of history education or the politics of education, I believe that requires, to my opinion, an additional expertise, I would say. So that is something that I believe that is lacking in the Commission, and would encourage my former colleagues to try to open up their work and include experts on historical didactics and Commission work, and basically try to integrate positive European experiences of this kind of bilateral or multilateral historical commissions in order to try to get better results in the work. Now, this is basically how the Commission works. One should keep in mind always the different layers of the context in which the Commission works. There is, of course, and maybe on the higher level, the issue of European integration of the Republic of North Macedonia, as it is called today. As researchers, as professionals in history especially, but also in other disciplines, the members of the Commission do work independently, do try to keep to their areas of expertise, but on some level, of whether it's on a higher level, on a lower level, it doesn't matter. On some level, the members are always aware of the different layers of context. So as I mentioned, whether it's the European integration, whether it's the bilateral relation between the 2 countries, whether it's the media discourse, the political discourse surrounding historical issues or the work of the Commission, etc. So it's in any case quite a delicate work to try to focus on your academic work, while and not being let to be influenced by other contexts around yourself. What I believe is very important, based on my experience, but so far, what I believe is important for the future of this commission is that, as I said, first of all, to allow to open its gates to more expertise from positive European experiences in or global experiences in works of commissions. Second, to be able to achieve a climate where there will be not many controversial statements by politicians regarding history or regarding the other, so to speak, in this issue, and to have a willingness to open sincerely for the mutual benefit in the long term, because I believe that this kind of commissions cannot and should not achieve instant results in 1 or 2 years during a very intense political process. But I believe, as experience have shown, that this type of commission should work for many more years and sometimes even decades, and take their own time in order to reach solutions that will be really long-lasting and stable. Because any rush to hasty conclusions and recommendations can only have positive effect on a very short term, and then can even cause bigger problems in the future. And another thing that I believe should be taken into consideration is that the commissions should, of course, work on a similar frequency in terms of a theoretical and methodological approach to the issues at stake. When there is a certain theoretical disbalance, which is quite normal in a way for the academic world, but still can also cause complications for the work of the commission. And in my opinion, this has been the case so far on some occasions. Yeah. Well, basically, I would finish here my introduction to the topic, and I'm open for further discussion.
Thank you very much, Darko. Maybe for our audience, are you a member of the commission, or have you been a member, or have you been mainly related to members?
Yes, so I was a member of the commission from its beginning in the late June 2018 until the late June, so in June 2020, for 2 years, and then I got out of the commission on my own, because it was my own wish. Yeah. Okay, so you actually shared experience from the inside, and now for the last period a bit as an informed observer. Exactly. I can share experience from my time when I was working in the commission, and then for the time afterwards, I'm not able to share more detailed information. Yeah.
And if I just also for clarification, if you said you get out, was it meant as a political statement that you stepped down, or was it just for other reasons?
Well, there are two major reasons basically. One is quite related to my personal life and career in a way, and the other is to is related to some of the issues that I have just mentioned in what I see as a problem. Okay, so there was a confluence basically of personal and in a way, yeah, it's a mix of reasons. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it's important in this kind of work because, of course, this commission has a central role, and of course, it's important to understand your role in this work. So, thank you very much, Darko, for demystifying maybe less the dispute, but a bit more the work of the commission that was set up between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And that is a very nice segue to Sofia, to our colleague Chavda Marinov. And he will now have a perspective from Sofia on the issue, looking at the problematics behind the historical disputes and the potential impact on the Western Balkan 6 countries. Chavda.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Flessenkamper. Let me first thank Heinrich Böll Foundation for the invitation and the organization of this really timely debate. Let me also state that although I was invited to discuss the problematics behind the Bulgarian-Macedonian dispute, I'm going to present very briefly the questions and topics featured in this dispute, as these topics have been already presented and discussed many times in international scholarship and also more recently in international media. I will try instead to go beyond the historical and linguistic contents of the quarrel and to focus on more general characteristics of this dispute and on the question how eventually it can be made politically irrelevant. First, concerning the topics of contention, on the one hand, the Bulgarian-Macedonian debate concerns a long list of historical phenomena spanning from the medieval era to the immediate post-Second World War period. So the question of the Macedonian antiquity that provoked the Greek reactions is not part of these questions. The controversial topics are namely personalities such as intellectuals, rulers, political activists, but also historical events, paramilitary organizations, and so on, that are most often claimed by both countries as part of their historical narratives, Bulgarian or Macedonian respectively. On the other hand, Bulgarian-Macedonian dispute is focused on the definition of the Macedonian Slavic language, which Bulgarian mainstream academia still considers as an illegitimate standardized form of a Western Bulgarian dialect. Moreover, the dispute is aggravated by the question of the existence of a Macedonian minority in Bulgaria, and also of the status and rights of people with Bulgarian national identity in North Macedonia. Let me now point out that although it has been less covered by international media, less covered than the Greek-Macedonian debate, the Bulgarian-Macedonian quarrel is already about 60 years old. It's actually started under socialism. This means that although it is not among the oldest nationalist quarrels in the Balkans, it is not purely conjunctural. On the contrary, it already has a certain historical background. It is rooted in politics, in popular perceptions and attitudes, and it's even part of certain banal forms of banal nationalism, so to say. This particular time frame of the historical debate itself is obviously related to the definitive construction of a Macedonian nation after the Second World War, which does not mean that a Macedonian nationhood did not exist prior to the Second World War, as Bulgarian nationalists and more recently politicians would claim. This fact is related to another typological particularity of the Bulgarian-Macedonian dispute among other Balkan historical disputes, at least initially in the mainstream Bulgarian wishful thinking. The denial of Macedonian national identity had not much in common with the forms of hostility and hatred that were typical of earlier Balkan conflicts surrounding Macedonia, namely those between Bulgaria and Greece or Bulgaria and Serbia. This characteristic of the Bulgarian-Macedonian debate is due to the fact that hatred obviously presupposes the idea of alterity, of otherness, while Bulgaria denies precisely the idea of a distinctive Macedonian identity different from the Bulgarian. That is why initially, not only initially, but also nowadays, the Bulgarian frustration concerning Macedonia is actually anti-Serbian, much more anti-Serbian, as it externalizes the image of the enemy, in this case, in the figure of the Serbs, the communists, or the pro-Yugoslav apparatchiks, etc., who in the Bulgarian imagination still control the political scene in North Macedonia. This was even declared somehow by officials from the former Bulgarian government. So since we are discussing also the potential impact of the Bulgarian policy regarding North Macedonia on the rest of the Western Balkans, we should maybe also bear in mind this Serbophobic aspect, which, by the way, was articulated in some statements of the former Bulgarian Minister of Defense, Karakachanov, and the Foreign Minister, Zakhariev. As a result of this wishful thinking, Sofia's policy towards former Yugoslav Macedonia was initially rather patronizing and condescending. Macedonians were imagined as immature individuals, as a kind of prodigal sons of Mother Bulgaria, who were expected to realize one day the historical truth about their Bulgarian ethnic roots. As this did not happen, soon after Bulgaria joined the European Union in 2007, Bulgarian policy acquired a more aggressive character. It evolved towards a tactic of pressure as the competent milieus in the foreign ministry and the other institutions involved realized that concerning the EU accession of Macedonia, Bulgaria was already in a privileged position. I would like to remind that this change of tactics happened already in 2011 on the eve of a movie release. Namely, Bulgarian members of the European Parliament mobilized against Macedonian film that, among other things, was presenting the fate of the Macedonian Jewish population during the Second World War under Bulgarian occupation and its deportation in the extermination camps. This fact is important as it shows, in my opinion, to what extent Bulgarian politicians and scholars who currently monopolize the discourse on historical truth are actually reluctant to face uncomfortable events in Bulgarian history. What happened later, namely since 2019, under Boyko Borisov's right-wing government, is clearly a policy of bullying, in my opinion. The former Bulgarian government clearly tried to impose traditional Bulgarian interpretations of Macedonian history, language, and identity on North Macedonia. Sofia actually offered the false choice to the government in Skopje: either accept Bulgarian interpretations and Bulgarian historical truths, so to say, or face a Bulgarian veto blocking North Macedonia's EU accession. The Bulgarian Foreign and Defense Minister, other state officials as well, and Bulgarian members of the European Parliament started attacks against Macedonian national identity and openly insisted that the Macedonian political elite should acknowledge the Bulgarian roots of Macedonians. Finally, as you know, the veto threats materialized in November last year. As Bulgaria's veto has obviously little sympathy among European institutions and leaders, Bulgarian state representatives did not hesitate to instrumentalize European politics of remembrance in relation to 20th century totalitarian regimes and tried to defame in Brussels Macedonian national identity as a product of Tito's totalitarian Yugoslavia. Ironically, what I would say is that the Bulgarian historical narrative and argumentation concerning the Slavic language and history of Macedonia were themselves to a large extent codified during the totalitarian regime of the Bulgarian Communist Party under Zhivkov. The idea that governments should possess and impose a uniquely correct reading of history that is implicit in the Bulgarian official policy could be also seen as a totalitarian reflex, at least in my opinion. Now, leaving the field of politics and diplomacy and going to the academic field, I must say that there are no many reasons to be optimistic. There is a common cliche in Bulgaria and in North Macedonia saying, leave history to the historians, meaning not to the politicians. But as a matter of fact, historians could be pretty efficient in creating nationalist conflicts. This concerns in particular the Bulgarian historians dealing with the history of Macedonia and the Macedonian question, like some of those participating in the Bulgarian-Macedonian Joint Expert Commission that was discussed by Darko Stoyanov. As the former Bulgarian government tried to use this commission as a leverage for imposing the mainstream Bulgarian interpretations, the scandals and the failure of this commission was to be expected. But within or without this commission, arriving at consensual interpretations and historiographical formulas is a different task between Bulgarian and Macedonian historians. Even more liberal and methodologically up-to-date interpretations launched by Bulgarian specialists could be unacceptable to Macedonians. Yet I'm not sure we need a consensus at any price. It is normal for historians to have divergent and incompatible interpretations, and expecting a version of the past that would be definitive and acceptable to everybody is clearly naive. At the same time, critical re-examination of one's own national historical narrative is still not a very popular aspect of the professional ethics and culture of most Bulgarian and Macedonian historians. So I'm afraid I cannot conclude this statement otherwise than by saying the obvious. Bulgarian-Macedonian historical dispute started as a political quarrel, and it could be ended only in the political field. Although this also seems to be difficult, there are actually a number of similar cases in contemporary Balkan history. That is what happened, for instance, in the 1970s with the century-long Greek-Bulgarian dispute about Macedonia. Therefore, I would set more hopes in the power of the political conjuncture than on the conflict resolution potential of academic experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chavdar. I mean, I think you couldn't have made a better segue into the power of the political conjuncture, as you called it, than you did, because obviously what you put on the table here is a little bit of historic depth, particularly with regard to the story of the Second World War. I was reminded very much of the work of Nadège Ragaroux in Paris on this, who has been quite groundbreaking in this. And this adds, of course, complexity and texture, and also adds even more European dimension to the conflict and to the dispute. And that European dimension is, of course, been dealt with, of course, the institutions I work for, but also by the European Parliament as a directly elected chamber of parliamentarians from the 27 member states, who are discussing European politics and also discussing the politics of relations between the European Union member states and those countries who wish to join the European Union. And of course, Bulgaria is a member of the European Union already since 2007, while Macedonia is on the way of accession with all the hurdles we discussed. And I'm sure we'll come back to this when we hear of Daliborka. But maybe, Tineke, if I can hand over to you, what kind of role do you see for the European Union in these disputes, given that the European Union itself has a number of, let's say, actors in these disputes as members, who by default can play a particular role on both sides, both in the disputes which are ongoing, but also within the institutions. So how do you envisage the role facing the next couple of years of the European Union in the dispute between Macedonia and Bulgaria, Northern Macedonia and Bulgaria?
Yeah.
There
yes,
she is.
you can hear me, but I cannot see myself, but hopefully I'm visible. Okay. Yeah, now I can. I didn't get permission to start my own video. So
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this very interesting and also relevant webinar. And thanks for your questions also, Tobias. Yeah, I'm member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm also member of the North Macedonian delegation. And also on that behalf, I was also a shadow rapporteur on the report that the European Parliament adopted recently on North Macedonia. Yes, rightly that you asked those questions to me, and it's good to follow up to Mr. Marinov. Indeed, he says it's up to the political conjuncture, but at the same time, he was not so optimistic. And this is very understandable. And I also must say that I'm not too optimistic, but I think it's really necessary that something will change on a short notice. We saw, of course, that there was no movement possible because of the elections, the upcoming elections in Bulgaria, which have taken place, but we already heard that now there's no possibility to find a formation of the government, so we will facing new elections in July. But what is good maybe to observe is that none of the parties that really used this aggressive non-Macedonian language during the campaign did won seats in parliament. So apparently it did not really resonate to the public. And also that meant that after the elections, the topic sort of died down significantly. And it's not a topic in the Bulgarian media at the moment. But of course, with new elections, it may be fueled again. And especially during the formation afterwards, and that the fact that we will have new presidential elections in autumn, we cannot exclude that the next half year, it will still be a topic. At least there will be attempts to fuel the debate again in the media. So that will make it very difficult to bring an end to the Bulgarian veto. But I must also say, you asked me about the role of the different actors in the EU, that I find it pretty disappointing that, at the time of the Bulgarian veto in November, you saw that many member states and also the German presidency called for immediate start of the negotiation talk, but were very silent towards Bulgaria, criticizing its position. And it did not clearly denounce that. And also when we saw last Monday, there was the Western Balkan was a topic on the Foreign Affairs Council, where the North Macedonian government was also present. That would have been a momentum also for the EU leaders to speak out publicly against the Bulgarian veto. But again, it's remained silent on that issue. And that is not really promising, I must say. And I think that also that leaves the gap for the Bulgarian politicians to keep on coming up with its language. And there's no pressure to change its position. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the EPP affiliation of Borisov's party. I don't know, but I think this is really a missed opportunity. I think it's so important because it also sends a political message to the North Macedonian people by keeping silent on the Bulgarian veto, that it actually sort of accepts this current deadlock. And I think that we can all see that the credibility of the EU, therefore, is really in danger among the society in North Macedonia. I mean, the trust was already damaged by the hurdles that it was faced with during the last years. First, with Macron wanted to have an enlargement strategy, another strategy. The Greeks demanded the new name, so the Prespa agreement. Both, of course, were completely outside the scope of the Copenhagen criteria. And that is, I think, very important for the EU actors to be very firm and tough in distinguishing on what criteria North Macedonia has to meet in order to start the accession talks, and what other issues maybe that emerge on the basis of other national interests are going to be mingled actually with a very clear criteria. Because, I mean, already since 2009, the European Parliament and the Commission have come up with positive recommendations to start the accession talks. And in the meantime, North Macedonia has only showed that it increasingly meets those criteria, so that it's more than ready to really have this intergovernmental conference to really start the accession talks. So luckily, the Macedonian political parties are still positive towards the accession process. And they also sent this special representative towards Bulgaria. So it shows the willingness to work towards a solution. But I think we should not keep on testing this patience, and specifically to stay clear on the distinction between what we want from them on the accession, regarding the accession, and what we can ask from them to try to solve the neighborly disputes. In the European Parliament's report, you can imagine it was a bit of a struggle to find an agreement among for the right balance in that, because it was already mentioned by Mr. Marionov, there are also European Parliament members who play an active role in fueling this dispute and discrediting North Macedonia. But I think we managed with a broad support actually to focus and to prioritize the need for the start of accession talks, and on the other hand to call for on the EU also to facilitate and to support the ongoing talks between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. For instance, also by with the proposal of funding in institutional youth dialogue between the two parties. But the report is very clear that it does not form an obstacle, the current dispute, for the start of the accession talks. And I think this is also very important for the other Western Balkan countries that we do so, because the credibility, you know, there should be a perspective for all the societies in Western Balkan countries that it's a realistic prospect to start the accession talks. We see that, you know, if the trust decreases, you see all types of other movements like Kosovo and Albania grouping together. You see, indeed, was already mentioned, Croatia and Serbia trying to influence more in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Bulgaria is doing this with North Macedonia. Of course, and then we also have this foreign influence like Russia and China and Turkey. We leave this gap, we leave this space by not giving a real perspective for the accession. And then it's logical that other powers step in. So I think what we should do is that the EU leaders should publicly declare their full commitment to the Copenhagen criteria and really should put more pressure on the Bulgarian government to lift its veto. I think the Council should prioritize this issue. And I think that indeed we are very depending on the presidencies also. And in that sense, I'm also not very optimistic for the short term. If you think about the Slovenian presidency, we saw the non-papers from Janša, which already show that this is not the right approach to the Western Balkan countries, and especially also through the Bulgarian elections coming up again. I'm not sure if the next half year will create a new possibility to kick off the accession talks. But we need to give it a try, indeed. And I think I completely agree with the former speakers that we should not leave it to historians, and we should therefore also not make that conflict bigger than it is in the framework of the accession process, because then we also create the pressure, the impression that finding a solution there is an important moment to start the accession talks. So I'm not really very optimistic. The only thing that I can say that Vareli did the proposal to decouple the accession talks from both Albania and North Macedonia. Borrell and other member states were immediately denouncing that idea, and that is, I think, very important. It would be very cynical because North Macedonia actually was much further in its process already than Albania, so it would even be a counterproductive signal towards the North Macedonian people if we would start with Albania and suspend the talks with North Macedonia. So actually, I think that the most important thing that should be done is all eyes and balls on the Bulgarian government, because now there needs to be an end of this blockage. European Parliament is still united, Commission is clear, and I think this is much more important than trying to focus and find a solution on the historical dispute. Thank you.
Thank you. There are also already questions coming in, which we'll take in a short while. Let me just clarify one question to you as a member of European Parliament. You know, I'm working for the Council of Europe, and we are a multilateral organization for over 70 years. And the issues of, you know, state building, nationhood have been around in Europe for quite some time. And it was also in the, you know, in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and 2010s. So they never go away. How much do you feel actually prepared for entering this discussion as European parliamentarians? I mean, okay, now you have COVID, it's very difficult to travel. This is obviously also not a good factor time-wise, because mediation and discussion is hampered. But in general, how much space do you have to discuss these issues? Because, I mean, these historical grievances, we see them now also with the United Kingdom leaving the European Union and the issues surrounding Northern Ireland. There are other issues in member states with regard to minority rights, historical grievances, etc. How much do you have space to discuss this, and how prepared do you feel in addressing them?
Yeah, well, I was for 12 years member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, so I know very well how important that organization is to overcome issues and also to have more mutual understanding, especially for the Western Balkans. This is very important. Indeed, the COVID has blocked or made it more difficult, because as a delegation of North Macedonia, for instance, we certainly would have visited North Macedonia, talked with the people. Of course, we have some meetings once in a while with political members of that part and our part, but I think it's important to go beyond the members of the delegation, to go beyond the political leaders, and also have our contacts in society, NGOs and other organizations, to really grasp better what's going on and what is actually the obstacle that needs to be lifted. And I think in that sense, indeed, the European Parliament is not very well developed in these types of issues. I mean, this is indeed more the history of the Council of Europe, and I think we should also rely on the expertise of the Council of Europe, so working closely together more than we do now. But this understanding is very important. Communicating, traveling, and also having joint events with society. But what is also very important, I think, is that we show as a European Parliament in those societies that we are really fully committed to involve them in the accession process. Because this is what I noticed when I talk with, for instance, Green members of North Macedonia, is that this is very vital for them to keep the trust in their societies in the whole accession process, that we are not visible, so that we are more an abstract thing. and I think this is also very vital, that we show that we understand them, and that we are still not that we are still just as firm to bring this process to a good end. Yeah, but of course, mutual understanding is important. But I think also because the ones who try to block are much more visible and vocal on this, may create the impression that we are all very much relying on this historical dispute, and that we also see this as an obstacle for the next step. So I think bringing the other message just as vocal is also very vital to keep the trust and try to bring the process further.
Before I move to Dalibor, when we talk about the EU conditionality, and I know the chat is already, very full on EU conditionality questions, I wanted to quickly come back to Darko and Shafta with two questions. Very short answer. It's actually the same question, and it relates to why are things coming up at certain moments? What is your interpretation? I mean, someone in the chat asks, why is it 60 years? Why are you so surprised? And then you can also ask yourself a lot about, fragility of concepts of nationhood. We didn't really discuss also about Skopje 2014, which is somewhat also part of this picture of what is going on in the region. So the question is really, why is this coming up? And why is it coming up at certain moments? And if we were in Western Europe, we would certainly use a different terms. We wouldn't call it historical disputes, but we could call it identity politics. So why is there such a high reliance on identity politics in certain moments? Let me start with Darko and then to Shafta, but very short, because then we want to talk about EU and conditionality.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I mean, I usually try to, to keep myself away from political analysis, but this question has also a historical dimension. Actually, is a very crucial question. It is my belief that why at this moment this question is raised has to do with what Shabdar was speaking before, a bit long-term historical political disputes, and with, I believe that perhaps Bulgaria believes that this is the this is the right moment when they're in position of power to impose something on a neighboring state, something that serves their national interests. This is my view personally, and this is why I believe that the EU accession of the Republic of North Macedonia should be separated from whatever historical commission is working, how it's working, whatever the conclusions are, because first of all, it's nonsensical to approve or disapprove of this process based on interpretation of the past. I mean, that's nonsensical. And second, because it will open the Pandora box for the whole region. I mean, if this becomes a principle, the entire Southeastern Europe, I mean, this will be hell. And I've actually, in my own experience, this is why I believe, this is why I gave this answer about why at this moment, because in my own experience, I have heard this directly and indirectly on several occasions, actually, and I have the belief that it is so. And that's why I also share some negative feelings about the future of the Commission. And
all right, Shafta, very quickly, why? Focus it again.
Yes, part of the answer is certainly the general elections in Bulgaria this year. Because as you probably know, the former government of Borisov was actually a coalition government with the participation of extreme right nationalist parties as a coalition partner. One of these political parties was VMRO, which is, so to say, specialized in the Macedonian question. So, to a large extent, this was really a part of the political marketing of VMRO during the over the last couple of years. But certainly, the answer is a little bit more complex because, as I mentioned, all this story started already 10 years ago. So obviously there are some tectonic movements within the Bulgarian foreign ministry and so on that I'm not aware of, but it seems so. So obviously there are nationalist lobbies who are trying to promote the national agenda, and suddenly, well, maybe they realize that the EU member status of Bulgaria is the right moment, and they
all right,
took the opportunity.
Excellent. This is exactly the segue to Daliborka's input on conditionality becomes blackmail. EU member states should not write the history of candidate countries. Daliborka, we know each other for many years, and you're also in a country, based in a country where these kind of conflicts are not unknown to you and the government. I don't see you in the video now, Daliborka.
I am unable to do that. I think that, okay, the host was supposed to let me in.
Okay, very good to see you, Daliborka. Now, I think we looked a bit now, in the situation, and now we're moving it, and there's a number of questions as well, and maybe some of them will already be touched upon. Is all of this happens in a context, and the context is the so-called Thessaloniki agenda, the EU membership perspective of the Western Balkan countries, set in 2003. As we know, North Macedonia, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, applied for membership already some 15 years ago. Then there was other issues on the table. But of course, there is an asymmetric relationship. I asked that to Tineke as well, the ins and the outs. And the ins have more more to say about the outs. And here maybe your input comes very timely. Why is there suddenly a shift to these kind of identity questions? What's your take on this? And what have you written in the paper?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm pleased to present in brief on behalf of our group highlights from the paper when conditionality becomes blackmail. As you said, the EU member states should not write a history of candidate countries, and I'm happy that this kind of the message has been actually also going on through all of the discussions that we have so far, because the entire situation that we have now with relations of Bulgaria and Northern Macedonia is also having a wider impact, starting from the fact that the unification of Europe and the reconciliation processes were unimaginable without dealing with the complex past, especially war past. We actually ended up with the having Europe being based on diversity of nations, languages, cultures, religion, historical experiences, but all of that with a common future. And this is what the EU has made so unique. This is why we are all coming from these aspiring countries that would like to have the same kind of the value base. And this is why, again, it makes us very unhappy to see that there also in the European Union, these political attempts to use history as a tool for denial of human rights and dignity, which is harmful on several levels. It endangers the basic principles and values of the European Union, which I have just reflected upon, but also sends discouraging messages to the others outside the EU. And I'm again referring to our countries, which are suffering a lot in the process of transition to the functional rule of law society. By the way, and this is also, I think, important to remind ourselves that we are coming from the societies of destructive consequences of such an approach in former Yugoslavia during its dissolution, and we are still coping to address in various manners all of these issues in the process of building these new societies. And that goes really hard. And exactly the EU is crucially important for all of us to make this process successful. This is why the Bulgarian blockade of Northern Macedonia opening accession negotiations with the reflects not only as the asymmetry of the power between the EU member states and candidate countries, as you and Walter pointed out, but it represents an abuse of that power. Namely, this policy of denial of one's language, identity, and human rights represents a threat against the European values and to regional stability, and has already damaged the trust and cooperation between the two governments. And on the other hand, it is clear that EU must develop mechanism of preventing its members of abuse of this position and disrupt the enlargement process with absurd demands on aspiring countries. And I think that our colleagues, historians, have also just mentioned these different historical perspectives should not be part of the EU enlargement process and should be solved by following the positive examples in recent European history. No nation should not and could not impose or ask from the other nations to accept different narratives on history by political decisions. And this is what we exactly have here demonstrated by Bulgaria. History is a scientific discipline and not something to be negotiated by politicians, even though we have seen a lot of the Balkans, but we are hoping to learn some better practices from the EU. And at the end of the day, politics should be facilitating relations between the nations and countries, not making them more troublesome or even creating new problems. And I think if we're talking about these good examples, Greek and Macedonian long-lasting dispute was one of these which could be used as a role model in a manner how it was solved. What we tried to do in this policy paper, are part of just identifying the current state of affairs, was also to send some messages to diverse stakeholders in North Macedonia and Bulgaria, but also in the countries of the region in Europe. And the major message is that they should all act responsibly. And we also mentioned through the discussion the role of the historians. We believe that politicians should stop relying on those who abuse historical narratives to incite nationalism and ethnic hatred, and to stand in defense of the basic principles of European Union, such as diversity and democracy. And there are still those historians who stick to that path, not letting their profession be led by politics. In very brief, a couple of the recommendations that we have mentioned, we are very much aware of the complexity of the relations between the EU member states, and it's really difficult to try to let's say not order, but to influence within that circle somebody, because everybody is considered to be equal. But this is an issue where the EU member states and the European Commission should officially reject and condemn the revisionist approach of the Bulgarian government, and to support experts to discuss the past free from the ideological, political, or any other pressure. Also, European Commission should send a message by opening the accession negotiations with North Macedonia, which has been already for far too long without solid justification blocked in that process. I'm referring again to the previous Greek case. And EU member states and European Commission should be consistent in respect of the EU basic principles and values, and condemn any attempt to deny the basic human rights of self-determination, not only outside of the EU, but also when it comes from the inside as the attempt. And finally, to prevent and stop the abuse of power in the process of integration Western Balkan 6 by member states, because I think we are opening their Pandora's box. I mean, this could be only a first example of the kind. In addition, Bulgarian and North Macedonian political leadership should respect and implement agreement for good neighboring relations with mutual respect and recognition. They should create positive and favorable conditions for experts to discuss the past within their profession and without the pressures. And they should also ask for the assistance of you mentioned Council of Europe, but also UNESCO and other relevant organization expertise in the work of this bilateral multidisciplinary expert commission on historical and education questions. In specific, Bulgarian government should immediately abandon its policy of denial of others' identity. And finally, we had two recommendations which refer to this commission, that it should really do its best to be objective and critical towards their own national historical narrative as the only way to overcome the disputes and promote dialogue based on arguments, even though we are aware that this is not easy in these circumstances. And to take into the account that these processes are slow, but they require dedication and sincere approach, as well as the long-term view. And just to wrap up, I think that this situation puts the entire EU enlargement process in danger, as the North Macedonia start of negotiation talks is hostage to the veto power of one EU member state who is using its position to impose its own political stance on history and memory. But this can be also opening doors to the other member states to try to impose something similar or something which is linked to the other. So conditionality, yes, very strict conditionality, but blackmail, no.
Thank you, Daliborka. I was thinking about, while you were speaking about, the EU as an actor, as a multilateral actor in the region. Of course, it comes with its own members. And how far have you actually thought about historical precedents in this, and how have them been solved or not? I remember, I'm old enough to remember 1993. There was a European Council and Andreas Papandreou was the chairperson back then. And basically the Greek government, being a new member of the EU at that time, they were only 10 years members of the EU, basically set some conditions with regard to Eastern enlargement, and that Cyprus needs to be part of the package, otherwise Eastern enlargement wouldn't go ahead. While in Cyprus we still have until today a UN mission on the ground. So how far actually are you discussing the history and legacy of the EU as an actor in the region, maybe not necessarily learning always the best lessons from its past behavior?
I would say that we haven't gone into that direction far too much, even though there have been some discussions. But this example is showing that you never learn all the lessons, and that this is not something that once solved can always be actually duplicated as the good example. We are working in a period with a lot of the populistic leaders who are missing the content for the policy shaping and nationalism, and that kind of the narrative are very appealing, even though very dangerous. And unfortunately, EU member states are not immune to that. What comes as a surprise is that we in the region have always have that. But one of the reasons why we were heading to the EU was that look on the EU as the mechanism or let's say entity which knows how to deal with that, because its member states are having certain value system. With this, we see that this value system is shaken in some of the member states, but this is of course opening completely another issue, because this approach towards Macedonia, and I was very much underlining that through this quite short reflection, is also against the founding values of the European Union. And this is something that the EU should discuss inside.
Absolutely. You see, I'm trying to move it into a multilateral discussion. I'm not a firm believer, actually, that these kind of things can be dealt with only bilaterally. Bilateral discussions are, of course, important. Now, on the EU, I have a couple of questions, and I would like to maybe call in one of those. And I don't know if Katja can do this, or Philip. There was a question on, someone wanted to really press the question, why why are member states not talking with clearer language on the Bulgaria issue, in particular also on the linguistic issue that was brought up by Bulgaria? I don't know who asked this question and if that person wants to get into the conversation. Otherwise, I'll put it out there. Why is there actually not more, you know, maybe we can say pressure among member states? Tineke.
Yeah, this is a little bit.
By the way, before you start, it was an anonymous question, so we can't put. I mean, anonymous. We can't get hold of the person, but still, we want to have this question answered.
It's sometimes not very easy to go in the minds of the member states and to explain their behavior. But it's what you see normally also, that member states do not really critically address each other's behaviors. I mean, this is also what we saw, of course, with the rule of law deficiencies in Hungary and Poland, where also member states remain silent, specifically because in Hungary, where you see that EPP tends to shy away. So therefore, I already mentioned maybe the political affiliation, you know, that they are one political family and therefore shy away. It's not an excuse, of course. I try to explain, but I don't quite understand, because I think there's indeed a lot of interest in going ahead with the accession process. Also, you know, because of the regional stability so close to our borders, and it's clear that you know, there's only deteriorating of the situation as long as we do not come forward. So it's very difficult to explain for myself that those other interests are not being prioritized. But I think it would also urge to see, can we better depoliticize the whole decision-making process? Because if you look now that there was already an agreement of the Council in March 2020, then the Commission came with its negotiating framework and asked again for an approval from the member states. And then, you know, I think also due to the elections, the upcoming elections, Bulgaria all of a sudden started to use its veto. So maybe that would also beg the question, do we need so much of an approval during the whole process of all the member states? Shouldn't we better make the Commission the strongest actor, you know, the leading the process, and only at certain moments that we need the approval? Because then we can really go ahead based on the Copenhagen criteria itself. And I think in that regard, the Commission and I think specifically also Varela could even work much more vigilantly on the real Copenhagen criteria. If I think of the rule of law, the situation of minorities, fundamental rights, I mean, then we would really be credible, and then we would really support the countries in getting ready for accession, really. So, yeah, I think that is something that we really should look into, because the more moments we give to the Council and decision-making by unanimity, the more we create these possibilities to hijack the process. Maybe it's even not the first example, but we also saw it, of course, with Slovenia and Croatia, where Slovenia all of a sudden used a bilateral dispute on borders in order to block the accession process. But I fully concur with Olja Revic that it is a dangerous precedent, and therefore we really should make clear that we should stick to the criteria, but not use, you know, the position of being a member state by trying to get something else with a neighboring country. And actually, as a final remark, what I also find remarkable is that I think that many people in the societies of those member states, also in Bulgaria, but also Slovenia and other neighboring countries, they also would benefit from the start of the accession talks, because of a lot of relationship, businesses, etc., that would also strengthen their their cooperation on a more societal level. So I don't know if the political leaders' efforts to block are really always in the interest of their societies as well.
This is interesting. There is Christophe Illon, who has written a very good paper back 15, 16 years ago about the creeping nationalization of the accession process. And actually, the train has left the station, I'd say, with the Nice and Amsterdam treaties already. And this kind of tendency was, of course, reconfirmed in the intergovernmental structure of the Lisbon Treaty. So I would be curious to see how you get this done. I was actually coining this idea of a méthode Barnier, a Barnier method, where you could actually see that actually maybe for the accession process for the Balkan countries, we need someone like Barnier who has a full trust of everyone and every institution to steer these complex issues really through some decision making. But for the time being, I think we are more in this creeping nationalization, as Christophe Illon has actually described it. But maybe I would like to come back to Chavdar and Darko. And Darko, maybe as a non-EU citizen, if I may say, or in the non-EU country perspective. What are you actually expecting from the EU? How would you like them to change their attitude? And what kind of discussion do you think they need to have about themselves? Because particularly Macedonia has a very complicated relationship with the European Union ever since it became independent. While it was quickly a member state of the Council of Europe, its relationship with the EU was really, really complicated, including embargoes by EU member states, etc. What do you think they should do internally inside the EU?
Well, interesting question. As a non-EU citizen, but an EU resident at the moment. Yeah, no, I believe, for me, let's say, as an outsider of the picture, it's crucial that the EU institutions really respect all of the declarations regarding human rights, both inside the EU and to their politics outside of the EU. I would like to see the European Union to have a more, how should I put, more consistent approach to the candidate countries, because, and I will say this very personally, like a non-EU citizen, I'm in a position personally, as millions of others are, to basically see our lives finish before we enter the EU. We are basically living of this promise of EU enlargement and EU integration, etc., etc. Now, I understand, of course, and this was mentioned before by Dalibor, of course, there should be strict criteria for EU integration. This is quite understandable. But if things don't work after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I mean, how much should this continue for in the future? Should we? And I understand also that this is a two-way, it's a two-way street. But I would like to see more consistency in some of this European politics. And in our particular case, I will just turn back to the historical dispute briefly. I would like to see EU to stick to its declarations and not, although this is very difficult, I understand, everywhere in the world, to not basically to try to stop the spread of the abuse of nationalism in its own ranks.
Mm.
This is a global problem. I mean, this is not only EU or the Southeastern Europe, of course.
Mm. Okay. Thanks, Darko. And I give the floor to Chavdar as someone who is in a relatively recent EU member state, not the most recent. This is, of course, Croatia. But maybe what could the EU do better with regard to this kind of historical dimension of a post-Ottoman state? Because, I mean, this word was not mentioned. I mean, this whole scenario has something to do with the demise of the European part of the Ottoman Empire. What would you have expected maybe to go different in the last couple of years? And while you answer this, we will try to get Johannes Ahlefeld into the discussion. I hope this works with the video, with 1 or 2 questions about historic precedents as well from a Central European perspective. So what could the EU have been done differently in the last 10 years in Bulgaria with regard to these kind of questions? Should they have looked sharper?
Well, I'm really not sure how to. Well, there were plenty of hopes in Bulgaria concerning European Union in different respects, particularly concerning the rule of law in Bulgaria, the fight against the corruption, and so on. Unfortunately, I can say that there is a certain disappointment within the Bulgarian society with the role of the European Union, because it was initially after Bulgaria joined the EU, the European Union was imagined really as the solution to all problems, and suddenly it turned out that this is not the case. We are every year we are receiving those reports. Criticizing the lack of reforms, the lack of progress in the Bulgarian, concerning the Bulgarian, the rule of law in Bulgaria, and the fight with the corruption and different other questions. Also, the freedom of media, which is a huge problem, has been a huge problem in Bulgaria during the last years. But finally, practically nothing has changed over the last years. So concerning this time, concerning Macedonia, what I would expect is really maybe more active stance on behalf of the EU institutions, even if already the former government was officials from the former government, like the Defense Minister Karakachanov, was complaining of European pressure and particularly of German pressure. But what I really saw as a positive example was the reaction of the foreign ministers of the Czech Republic and Slovakia, who on 2 occasions criticized this instrumentalization by Bulgaria of the European Union as an arbiter of historical debates. And in my opinion, this was really a very positive signal.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. I invited Johannes Ahlefeld, who is also an expert working in Berlin on various foreign policy questions, to the stage. And I think he can activate his microphone and also camera if he wishes so, because he put an interesting question in the perspective of how discussions have been in Germany, for instance, about national narratives, etc., and also about the, let me call it the personnel, the people around these conflicts. There are some people carrying these conflicts. Johannes, the floor is yours. And maybe you introduce yourself quickly as well, a bit more precisely as I did.
I'm a political advisor to the German Social Democrats in Parliament, and I've been covering the Balkans in previous capacities. At the moment, I don't operationally deal with the region, but I'm still following. So my question was actually, wouldn't it be possible to outsource the whole debate about history to the Historical Commission? Actually, having some time after I posted online, I saw that the bilateral German Polish Commission was established in 1972 and started out only with recommending or criticizing each other's school books before, let's say, the end of the Cold War. And then only in 2008, the commission was tasked by the 2 foreign ministers at the time, Steinmeier and Sikorski, to actually come up with a common historical school book, which ended up as a 4-volume edition. And the first came out in 2016 and up to 2020, the last one. So that kind of goes back, I think, what the previous speaker from Podgorica recommended. There may be more time necessary and complete mandate. And then you can put pressure, in a sense, on, let's say, government to rescind the kind of political blackmail game if it comes to the people who are in task. And I think that would be course of action that should have been recommended by the EU and probably also by national governments to the Bulgarian and Macedonian governments too.
Okay. This is a very concrete question, which I'll leave for you to answer. And maybe a last one from the chat, because we will coming now to the concluding round. A last one from the chat is actually concerning the personnel. For instance, I remember that former Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Mr. Gruevski, for instance, he is an asylum seeker in Hungary currently. And there's also political party networks which are playing a role. This is a question that is here put in the chat, and how much have they got an influence on what is going on, and you know, muddying maybe the clear waters of a merit-based accession process. If these are all questions, I'm sorry for, I'm having like so many screens in front of my eyes. If I missed something, I will ask my colleagues to shout at me. Otherwise, I would slowly move to the concluding round, and we'll go in the same order as we opened. And each of our panelists have one minute. So it will be Darko, Chavdar, Trinike, and also if Daliborka wants to add something, of course, as well. Very short. What should we do next is a question to all of you. 1 minute. Okay. Apart from having coffee, or those who smoke having a cigarette, but it's like, what should we do next on this issue?
I believe in general, we should, first of all, disassociate the process of EU accession from such historical debates. Enlarge the historical debates instead of closing them to a small commission, which can be seen as a censorship body or a body that will produce historical truth. If we want real dialogue, let's make it long-term, let's make it multilateral, let's include positive experience, and let's open it to the public and to other experts. So okay. Make it a larger dialogue. Yeah. Okay,
thank you. Very good operational conclusion. Chavdar, what should we do next?
I absolutely agree with Darko Stoyanov. There is a need of a dialogue between both countries, but it is something that will take many decades. So it is not something that will happen in a year or so, like the former Bulgarian government was expecting quick results, prompt results from the Commission. But in my opinion, obviously there should be a more clear stance on behalf of the EU institutions concerning this, to a large extent, absurd blackmailing and bullying on behalf of Bulgaria.
All right. Trinike, as you are the budgetary authority in the European Union together with the Council, what Darko and Chavdar proposed also requires money for multilateral cooperation. Are you ready to put also some money on the table for multilateral history, civil society debates, etc.? As a Council of Europe, we just have created the Observatory for History Teaching in Europe, which is a multilateral body, which I think may be very useful. But still, what should we do next?
Yeah, I think that could be helpful, but it should not be seen as a way to bring the accession process further, because therefore I think it's very important that we only emphasize that we need a decoupling of this historical dispute and the accession process. So if we start now doing things with funding and so on, we may create a wrong impression. So decoupling, that should be the message, much more political pressure on Bulgaria. And indeed, what also was said by Darko, we should give the right example, because if we all the time come up with other arguments and we do not keep our promise, what message do we give to the societies and political leaders in Western Balkan countries, that they can just also, start behaving in the way that we do at the moment, and that would really be wrong. One sentence on impunity, because Takvar is very right. The rule of law is very much undermined in Bulgaria itself. And by staying silent on that, we also create an atmosphere of impunity. And I also see like this veto is also a type of, non-compliance with our own criteria and our own political agreements. So we should not tolerate impunity, enforce compliance with our own rules, and that also includes with the Copenhagen criteria. And for that, in order to be sure that member states do not continue polluting this process, keep the member states and the council on a little bit more distance from the whole process.
All right, Daliborka, as a representative of the strategy group, Western Balkan Strategy Group, 1 minute left for what should we do next?
I will align to this impunity issue. I think this is very good that it has been phrased as such, because it is something that should be more introduced into the discourse and debate in the European Union, because the states which are aspiring because they are lacking certain criteria, certain values, certain standards, and they should be learning from those which are in the EU. But if being member of the EU means that you can actually try to, let's say, simulate some of the reforms, as Montenegro has been doing, for instance, for years, and then enter and behave again as you used to behave before that, this is not something that the EU should be. And this is, and again, I'm bringing back the things in the EU courtyard, because I think that the one who has the most of the power has the most of the responsibility. And this is why this predominantly here lies on the EU and EU member states. I'm not excluding at all that there is certain responsibility also on North Macedonian side, because one extreme is also feeding another extreme. But this is where the problem should start to be resolving from the EU, in order to have Northern Macedonia one day in the EU, but also to give an example that EU is not applying double standards.
Okay. Thank you very much, Daliborka. Thank you very much, Tineke Strik. Thank you very much, Shafta and Darko, for joining this discussion. I hope that we were able to somehow shed some light on a very complicated issue, how to come historical divisions, and we looked at the case study Bulgaria and North Macedonia. I'd like to thank also everyone who participated in the chat and in the discussions. I know we were able to answer some questions directly and bilaterally through Q&A. I'm sorry if we couldn't maybe cover everything, but feel free to send an email to the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and we'll try to direct you to also some resources. There's also the very interesting paper of the Western Balkan Strategy Group that Daliborka has presented. And I think if we take 3 lessons out of this here, number one, very strong message is the EU accession process is not the way how to overcome historical divisions. There should be the criteria which are inherent to the EU accession process. The second recommendation coming from your panel, from this panel, is let's work more broadly and more deeply and more seriously on issues of historical divisions, historical communalities, work across commissions, use commissions, but work across them, involve the society, involve parliamentarians, but not only from the region, but in a from the countries concerned, but in a multilateral fashion. And I think there are very few regions where you need to do so much multilateral work as in the Balkans, because of all the historical developments there. And thirdly, I think this is very important, also from my personal point of view, is the rule of law as a foundational principle of working together in the European continent through European public law, through European community law, through the Treaty of European Union. has to be really the focus of our attention. And here it seems that nobody is perfect. The problems are in the member states as much as they are in the non-member states. If I look at the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, we know that nobody is perfect, but we're also not equal in our imperfection with regard to these things. But nevertheless, there should be no place for complacency with regard to the rule of law. Now, this concludes this panel. For those who know me, I'm a fervent reader. I believe in reading books. I do a little bit of a book promotion here, because of course what we discussed is not new. There's a beautiful dissertation which you cannot read by a young scholar from 1912. It's called The Reform Action, Austria, Hungary and Russia in Macedonia, 1903 to 1908. And guess what the reform action was about? The rule of law, the public administration, etc., etc. It was actually 6 priorities on this, including also minority questions. But there's also a very good book of a woman who is not known very much, Elizabeth Barker. She was a correspondent of British papers during the Second World War, and she wrote this beautiful book on Macedonia, its place in Balkan power politics. And Elizabeth Barker went on to be a correspondent also in Brussels and elsewhere. But it's a beautiful book also on this. And if you really want to dive in, and that's for our German readers, a scholar from the University of Bochum, Fikret Adamir, has done his dissertation in 1979 on the Macedonian question. And that is, you can find online, the Macedonian question, its emergence and development until 1908. And each of these books will give you a lot of déjà vus on what we just discussed, about how complicated it is to build European unity after empire in the shadow of nationalism. With this, I wish you all a very good day. Stay tuned on the Heinrich Böll Foundation's activities. Follow the European Western Balkan Strategy, the Western Balkan Strategy Group of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And I'm not sure if I'm closing this session or if the Heinrich Böll Foundation is closing it. But with this, I would like to thank you for attending this very important discussion. That's it.
Thank you also. Bye.
But I don't know. This kind of things are unclear always, you know. So bye bye.
You did
to
a great job.
Yes, but you know, we need to have these things like in the movies, to have like a credits rolling down. I think speakers have a speaker room